Hello,
Hi.
and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage. This is a series of chats, conversations, chewing the proverbial fat between myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and my good friend Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer. And this is where we talk about designing better miniatures games. So, what we've been doing over the last few conversations, and we'll probably keep doing for the next few, is redesigning existing games, or at least trying to take the brief from which existing games might have been designed and question like how we might design a similar game, or some sort of traps and pitfalls that games of that genre can fall into. So what we decided to chat about today is I suppose the genre is sports games, specifically the sort of the best known examples are probably things like Blood Bowl would be the sort of the big daddy, I guess. But
Right, and this one's kind of easier for me because I actually did redesign Blood Bowl and I called it Crud Bucket. So
yeah,
yeah, I've opinions on this topic that are
yes, and
relevant and recent.
yes, I actually designed one for the artist of Pukeapocalypse, which he's talking about having someone publish and take to Kickstarter at some
Oh yeah, yeah,
point.
yeah. So that yes, because I knew about that, but it's not public yet, is it?
No, it's yeah,
All
somebody
right.
somewhere is talking about Kickstartering it, but we'll
Oh
see.
well, so we'll talk in sort of vague and hypothetical terms about that one
Yeah,
during this conversation, no doubt.
yeah, but other examples would be like Guild Ball is a well-known one.
Hmm.
I think it's Dread Zone. That,
Dread Zone, yep.
that's another one. Takure is a rugby-based miniatures game. So
Yeah,
there,
Forbidden Psalms, Will slash Kevin has got Mork Ball,
yeah,
Merc Ball, which I haven't played yet, but
yeah.
I'm
So
gonna
there's
pick up a copy off of him at Dragon Meet, no doubt.
cool. Yeah, so there's a few sort of ball-based sporting games. There are a few, funnily enough, like you saying, Crud Bucket. Obviously to a degree, Gaslands is a sport as a miniatures game. Motor
Yep.
racing is still a sport, and I think like so the. I think the big issue with these sorts of games is one that also, to a degree, came up with Gaslands, and it's where the violence and the sport bit cross over. So, like, for example, in Gaslands, I remember really early on in playtesting, there's a point where you said, "Oh, the person leading the race always loses because they always get destroyed." And my reaction to that was, "Well, that's a problem. We need to do something about that." And it,
Just like in running races, the person at the front just gets shot.
yeah, you just shoot him in the head, and it's like, well, why did? But that means you never want to get into first place, and that creates its own sort of issue. And generally, like just as we came on, you were holding up the Guild Ball rule book, and
Mm,
Guild Ball is the sort of
poster child.
the poster child for when the violence in a sporting miniatures game becomes too efficient and too effective. So, for those who aren't aware, the first run of Guild Ball they shut down on the basis that basically sidelining the ball, often literally, and just murdering the opponent was far too consistently efficient and effective way of winning the game, and they felt they couldn't reset all of the teams and all of the rules in such a way that they could get it back to being a game where attacking people was an option, but also running the ball was an actual reasonable option.
And there's a few different directions that I want to talk about this, but like one of them is the fact that like this is, as we always talk about, this is just a scenario problem. Like the book right on page like 20, which is the first page of rules, it has how to win and it has goals. You score 4 VP when you score a goal. Good, sounds like a sport. Body count. You gain 2 VP each time an enemy model suffers the taken out condition. So this is just like the scenario. Like the rest of the game could be good or bad, but it's completely controlled by that moment there where they introduced a second victory point condition. It's quite a generous one as well,
Yeah,
comparatively to what
yeah,
I imagine the ball ache of scoring a goal is.
and also, of course, always taking out other miniatures. You want to do that anyway because that's an
If you can
inherent.
do it, it's always going to be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a powerful move. It reduces your opponent's options. It gives you more freedom. So it's like, well, if I score a goal, all that I achieve is scoring the goal. I haven't weakened you. I haven't made my life easier. If I kill one of your minis, I've made my life easier. I've reduced number of options you have,
Mm.
and I've scored VP in this particular instance. And it's one of the funny things like that. So many miniature sporting games. I mean, I can't immediately think of one where causing fatalities to the opponent isn't an option, which is sort of weird because it doesn't turn up that much in normal games of, soccer. Well, yes, obviously.
No killing in Crud Bucket. And
Yeah,
this is exactly the point. Like, I don't play Blood Bowl anymore, and that's partly because the last time I had a go at joining a Blood Bowl league, um, I showed up with a team. I got my face entirely kicked off in the first game. I think I had like 5 or 6 models literally die in the like final wrap up because I had basically my whole team taken off, and like that was all the game was about, and it wasn't about throwing the ball or caging the ball or playing the sport. It was just like kick the other guy's balls off and then haha, you're not going to be able to play another game. And it left me so cold on that game overall. And I know there's plenty of people listening who are fans of Blood Bowl and probably play it regularly, but it just left such a sour taste in my mouth in terms of like the comparison between what it was that I was imagining this game would do differently and be different. I played it since I was a kid. I know what Blood Bowl is, but you know what I mean? Like, I play this because I'm not like I can play any number of miniature skirmish games where we kick each other's nuts off, but I can't play any number of games where we're trying to maneuver the ball around and, create different pressure zones and, fling it from one end to the other and radically change the focus of where the whole action is just by like kicking the ball over there or whatever. There's a ton of really fun dynamics that are available in a ball based sport. You've got this camera focused on this point and everything else becomes only relevant in connection with that moving point of interest. It's super good.
yeah, absolutely. It's like, any sports based game has this instant hook, which is, this is a game that isn't about just slaughtering the other person. This is a game that's about manipulating the ball and doing things with the ball. And so there's this very clear sort of proxy action that you have to figure out how to make it work and how to manipulate it and how it works. And then we keep just sticking in the murdering again. So it's
Well,
like,
yeah, because I think that like I've talked about this metaphor a lot, but like I like the idea of magnets in
yeah.
miniatures games, and always trying to like the reason that we've as a community kind of migrated towards objective based miniatures games is because they provide these funny little magnetic fields that aren't just kill the opposing general or whatever. And stuff like kill the opposing general is itself a more selective magnet than just everybody line up and pick a target. But the thing that's hard with objective based games is to keep those objectives very dynamic. You
Mm,
see it in some places like I quite like the way that objectives dance around in like Warhammer Underworlds or whatever, like different, there's games where different objectives turn on and off, that kind of stuff keeps it flexible. But with a ball-based game, it's just so natural and emergent and non-discrete, except both Crud Bucket and Blood Bowl are
yeah, yes.
discrete.
But it's like not in a normal game, objective manipulation has to be kept usually has to be kept relatively simplistic because you've got like the big chunk of the game, which is the killing and the guns and the whatever else it happens to
Mm.
be. And then if you make sort of manipulating the objective overly complex and sort of involved and emergent, it ends up taking so much cognitive load because it's like, okay, well, this is a secondary thing that I'm meant to engage with, and now you're telling me that it has like multiple different ways of interacting with it. Where a sports game has the opportunity to go like, okay, no, we're going to make the way the ball acts complicated and interesting because that's obviously the thing that we should be championing in this game. It's a game about the ball, about the way the ball is manipulated.
Mm.
And so you can have like multiple pages about how the ball works, about people going, why am I having
Yeah,
green light?
this is weird and indulgent. What's going on here?
Absolutely. And I
Mm.
think it's one of the things that's like super difficult with ball-based miniatures games, I guess, which will be
Stop chuckling.
the title of
I
this.
hear you tittering, you in the audience.
Titty not. But yeah, the in real life, professional whatever American football players, professional soccer players, etc., can get a lot out of a ball. They can make it curve and swing and go further, and they
Even
can
a very fine Sabutio player can do these things.
indeed. Whereas there's very few sort of ball-based miniatures games that give the ball anything other than a dead straight passage from one point to another. Because like a lot of the time the ball is more or less abstracted. It,
Yeah.
you if you have a token on the board to represent it, that's not often necessary if you can remember where it is. um and it's like that token never sort of curves across the pitch as it's being kicked around, or even things like rebounding the ball like intentionally off of certain objects, things like that are very rare to sort of to see. Normally, if the ball goes sort of out of control, it becomes randomized and scattered and bounces around obscurely, and the likelihood of a player actually being able to do that in an intentional, and thought through manner is very very rare.
Yeah, and I think that's where like using tape measures and free movement of space is underutilized here.
Absolutely.
Because we're all educated by Blood Bowl to think of it in discrete board gamey terms, and indeed that's what I did with Crumb Bucket, just because I happened to be making Chess 28 games at the time that the game occurred to me. But yeah, having the infinity of movement in space, being able to manipulate that, but not too much, like it becomes my pet love, which is it's an inertia problem in miniatures games.
Yeah, it certainly can be. So like the game I was mentioning that I designed in this realm, funnily enough, the thing that I primarily was inspired by was Speedball, the old
Oh yeah.
Bitmap Brothers game. I just remember one of my favorite things in Speedball is that there's a scoring pod, like well, there's two of them sort of a quarter of the way up the pitch for each side. And when you threw the ball at the scoring pod, it bounced off. And so you could be running up and bounce the ball off its score, catch the ball again, keep running, or rebound it off to another one of your players and take it off an angle. And that's a fairly simple thing, sort of being able to intentionally bounce the ball off of something in order to pass it to another player. And if you're, the players, as in the players of your game. And that's one of the things about sports-based games is having to refer to players and players,
Yeah.
teammates and players.
Teammates and coaches.
Yeah. If one of if a player manages to get one of their teammates to rebound the ball off of something and have it angle off and get caught by another teammate, that's one of those just immediately satisfying, makes you feel smart moments. I always remember like when Blood Bowl first came out, there was I don't know if Dungeon Bowl is still around, but there was Dungeon
It
Bowl.
had a reincarnation about 4 years ago.
And the thing about Dungeon Bowl that was so great is because it was being played in a dungeon, you could rebound the ball off of walls. So you could take a pass intentionally into a wall, bounce it around.
Oh right, and did it have like snooker logic?
Yeah, and it had sort of hard angles. So if somebody was going to intercept your pass, you could smack
That's
it off a
cool.
wall, bounce it round, have somebody else behind them catch it with no chance of an interception. And when you actually managed to do that, it was just immediately incredibly redolent of the fact that there was a ball that had some sort of realistic physics, and it just made you feel incredibly smart and powerful as a player.
Mm.
So it seems perpetually odd to me that games like Blood Bowl and Guild Ball don't give you those options to actually do cool things with the ball. It's like it tends to be, if you're really good with the ball, you pass very sort of consistently, and the ball goes to the person you wanted it to, or you can, in the case of Guild Ball, score from like a greater distance, or with a lower chance of anybody being able to stop it, rather than like well, I can bounce it off that piece of
I
terrain.
think there's an interesting thing here as well with regards to like um directionality, like cardinal directionality in Blood Bowl and board gamey stuff, and like wanting to make a skirmish game, but then not wanting to necessarily worry about not 360 movement and facing and stuff. But like everything that you were discussing there just makes me want to be absolutely certain what direction a player is facing, because they can move most easily in that direction, but particularly they can kick most directly in that position. Because I'm thinking about like, playing FIFA and stuff where the amount of curve and spin that you add to the ball and stuff really matters. And so it's almost like, yeah, like the inertia of turning, or the fact that like, like in a mech game quite often you're like walking in a straight line because it's hard to turn. Like in this situation, you're moving at speed. It matters from like the microsecond to the microsecond, like what direction your kind of momentum is traveling in, for the control of the ball and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun things to be messed around with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sort of giving the ball a bit of inertia. It always reminds me of remember the old PC game Sensible Soccer.
Hmm.
So that was a
Glenn and I
video.
are massively dating ourselves with our video game references. Clearly,
Yeah,
neither of us have played a sports game since 1996, but whatever, it's fine.
but that was a very sort of there was an interesting soccer game because it was one where the ball came to you and it didn't get immediately locked to your feet as you were running along. You actually had
Mm.
worry about the inertia of the ball and the position of your player and sort of keep control of it in sort of small, subtle ways rather than just the ball comes to you and it just magnetizes to your player's feet and then you run around and worry about how you're going to pass it. And I think definitely, yeah, sports miniatures games don't lean into the ability to give the ball its own sort of set of rules in that to attempt to replicate to some degree how a ball actually acts in the real world. But yeah, yeah.
I, so
So,
I've got another sort of angle to head off on. Haha. So one of the things that I think is intriguing about sports games is that like as you imagine a if you're trying to capture a real game with a real set of rules, or you're imagining some kind of fantasy or science fiction game, you end up in essentially with like one core scenario, one core
mm,
game mode. There is this one way that you win, there's one deployment because that's the way that the pitch is shaped, that's where the scoring buckets are or what have you. And that's kind of interesting because a lot of what we do as miniature games designers, or what a lot of what we expect as miniature games players, is this like toolkit physics engine thing that we can then run a bunch of different scenarios on top of. And
mm,
there's nothing stopping you like creating a ball physics engine miniatures game and then having lots of scenarios which are like, oh, okay, we're going to just do like the whole of, we're going to do the whole of the Summer Olympics kind of. There'll be tennis, there'll be squash, there'll be hockey, there'll be football, like there'll be all kinds of different rules and setups and scoring victory conditions, but they'll all essentially use the same physics engine. Nothing stopping us creating something like that. But I think that it's fun because actually creating a sports miniatures game, you can zero in on something that's like, well, let me make all of the design decisions about making this configuration, this set of distances, this number of
mm.
playing players on the field. Like, um, it's something that like I don't know that I would have gone this far, but like Offspray 100% wouldn't have let me go as far as that with Gaslands. But like there's a version of Gaslands that was just like a race car game and didn't
Mm.
worry about those other scenarios, and therefore didn't have to design in the flexibility for those things, and could have gone harder in the paint in terms of things that would work for that core scenario. So I think that designing a fantasy or a science fiction or a real world sports game, that's like a cool, quite freeing thing that you might only need to get one scenario right and it wouldn't feel weird.
Yeah, I think it's what's the thing that's very interesting, I think, about Guild Ball specifically is like like you said, there's this one scenario, there's one battlefield. You can have little bits of terrain in it, but realistically, there's not a mass amount of variety, and certainly the goals are always in the same place.
Was it basically just a 3 by 3 blank square, as far as I
Um,
remember it? Yeah,
it
I think so.
it was, narrower than it was long. It was, it is a little bit shorter than a Blood Bowl pitch from memory. Um,
Yeah, it's a long time since we both looked at this game. But yeah, anyway, the point being that you've got a fairly predictable setup.
yeah, and also, the nature of sports teams is you've got a fairly sort of preset number of players. I mean, you can't have a situation where someone's running a horde and someone's running an elite force. It's everybody.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, that's within your gift to give. And in Crud Bucket, I let people do that to a small degree. But yeah.
Sure, but generally it's, with a little bit of wriggle room, Blood Bowl teams and Guild Ball teams are about the same size. And to the
Mm,
degree where Guild Ball teams, you have positions and you've got to have people that are in those certain positions.
mm,
And I think the thing that's interesting about Guild Ball is that it's lent into that by making it sort of about very carefully and finely crafted teams. You have the various guilds, and they all work in very specific ways. And each season they release more guilds or a couple of more players for the existing guilds. And so the way they've gone with, like, instead of multiple different scenarios, it's there where there's multiple teams, and those teams really heavily change up the way
mm.
the game plays. I think it's an interesting way of going, because it's like most people only play whatever the main scenario of most miniatures games are anyway. And so, like, the most of the time the variation you're going to see is between the forces that are put down. And so, sort of going, yeah, it's going to be about the forces, it's not going to be about the scenario. And these forces are going to be, because they are small, you can't have massive variations in certain tactical sliders. They're going to be extremely carefully crafted and push the sliders around in a very sort of specific, sort of duel-like way. And I think that's something that's well worth sort of leaning into if you're doing a game like that has that single scenario. But yeah, I think totally the idea of, like, creating a ball physics engine and going, okay, here's the tennis, here's the volleyball, here's the hockey, here's the bowling. You could do a range of things with that. You could do a sort of Wii Sports version of
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
table
to pick up on the
sport
previous
game.
thing you said though, like one of the things that I think about, um, obviously this is because of my Gaslands brain, but also because of my time at Epic Games. But like, I think about the skill ceiling in Rocket League quite often, and that's something that like instead of necessarily like as well as or instead of factions or scenarios, like there is an element to which like if the way that you move around and you manipulate the ball and you manipulate the other team members, your friends or your enemies, like if there's a lot of granularity and detail in that such that there is a reasonably high skill ceiling, like that in itself I think could feel very sports like, in that like you've ended up figuring out how to achieve things in a way that just, other people just can't figure out how to get that engine working. So that I don't know, that also is a thing that I think about a fair bit. It's one of the things that I think was so successful about Space Kits, and like definitely the book that's going to come out next year, stuffed full of scenarios, is definitely going to have a sports ball game mode for Space Kits, because like as a dexterity game, that's like it connects to my childhood love of Sabutio, but it's also just like a really fun way of achieving some of these things, whether it's flicking a d20 around as a football, or if it's rolling dice like you move orcs around in Space Kits, and therefore the ball can curve around objects and can move in a way that drunk orcs do, because within reason a moving ball, particularly a rugby ball, is a bit like a drunk orc. And so I think that there's a ton of interesting stuff in the sort of hidden stratosphere of Space Git's like dexterity skill ceiling that like when you start playing you're like la 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 la, just throw the dice around, and then after a game or two you're like, okay, actually let's lock in because I think I can do some pretty clever stuff with this movement system if I'm good with it. And that's because of like the dexterity element. Like it becomes a very variable sort of skill ceiling, feels real sort of a situation, as opposed to like, well, if we just got a few interlocking rules and we can read those rules and we can lock them together or not, you know, in a fairly binary way, then it doesn't feel as skill ceiling-y.
Yeah, I think like obviously dexterity games generally have that built in, and there's a whole bunch of dexterity games like Pitch Car, to a degree, Flicking Heck, Stay Cool. There was a golf dexterity game where you played with what essentially looked like a pyramid tea bag.
Oh, I have that one. Mars Open, it's called.
Yeah. And like after a few games of that, you realize you can do some really interesting things
Yeah,
with
because
that.
it's got this strange, like part half of it's aerodynamic, half of it isn't. So like you can do some really weird stuff with it if you flick it right.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love
So
that game. Just a note, that's the last board game I played with my late father-in-law before he passed on, and
wow.
I have incredibly fond memories of it for that reason. So I'm never selling my copy.
Well, it's a really lovely game because it's very simple because it relies on the fact that there is that physical skill ceiling. That said, I think that like a lot of miniatures gamers revolt against the idea that their actual hands and ability to
Yeah,
manipulate.
no, sure, but like, thinking of my dear father-in-law, like he was particularly excited to play that game because he loves a push your luck sort of swing golf computer game thing,
Mm,
and a push your luck situation or a sort of uncertain resource management situation to do with the strength of your kick or the, you know, the placement of your ball or whatever. There could be quite a lot of skill in managing a push your luck system such that you get access to some pretty clever trickery if you skill that out,
yeah.
in a way that like making decisions around skid dice in Gaslands can kind of make or break. You know, it can mean that an experienced player absolutely runs rings around a newbie.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah, like you say, the placement of templates in Gaslands has a lot of the similar sorts of bits of a skill ceiling that
Well,
dexterity
no,
has.
that too. I was actually just thinking of like your decision making around the skid dice and when to
Mm.
push, when to re-roll and stuff. Like there could be some stuff around that in terms of like, you know, the strength of your kicking or your use of momentum or, you know, whatever.
Yeah. I think there's a complexity option where if you have a ball that has its own sort of inertia and you have a player who has their own inertia
Mm,
and you have some level of unpredictability in relation to dice, like when you come and kick the ball, you can have a level of complexity, you know, of a level that actually mathsing it out is unlikely to happen in the moment, and working on a gut feeling of the ball's doing this, I'm doing this, I should therefore be able to do this when I hit it, can create that sort of that magical skill moment where everything was open but the other person can't quite figure out how you knew that what was going to happen was what was going to happen.
mm,
So and I think like what all of this comes down to is like figuring out a way to replicate the fact that I don't understand how David Beckham gets a football to curve in midair after kicking it, you know, on the tabletop by letting me sort of flick something or put together two very difficult to judge vectors or place a shape onto the tabletop in a way where the visual reasoning that you've picked up after a certain amount of playing looks like witchcraft to somebody who hasn't sort of locked that in at that point. I think are all good ways of replicate, because the excitement of sport is when a top level sportsman does something which was totally unexpected because they're in the zone and they have a sort of skill that's sort of superhuman within that specific moment. And the beauty, I think, of tabletop games is allowing normal people to get a little taste of that, of going like pop, 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 click, and the other person's just jaw drops and, you know, they
mm.
couldn't see it and they couldn't know it. And so,
One other thing that I particularly focused on in Crud Bucket because it becomes interesting from an activation system point of view. But like the other side of that, like um an individual performing like an incredible act of physical skill is like a team working like clockwork together, and like them become kind of almost mind reading because they've practiced and they know each other so well.
Mm.
In Crud Bucket, that's just pretty much represented by a simple rule, which is when a player gains the ball in Crud Bucket, they immediately activate even if they've already activated this turn. So you can
Mm.
create by skillfully and potentially by taking risks, like passing the ball between different players. You can get like command of the sort of action. The camera will continue to follow you as long as you're taking cool actions. And it also it pushes you to do things with the ball, because the ball becomes a thing that gives you more activations and therefore more power, rather than just waddling up to people and getting in their way, which gets you less momentum in the game.
Yeah, I think that the problem I always had with Blood Bowl was that moves with the ball were never sort of unexpectedly exciting enough. It often tended to be a quite sort of grinding game. A lot of the
Mm.
time, you knew where the ball was. You knew pretty much where the ball was going to be next turn. You could either sort of get bodies in the way, or you couldn't. And if you couldn't, there was a certain sort of rolling inevitability of it.
Hmm.
It was never sort of like there's no possible way he can make that pass. Ah, yeah, no, see, and I think that was the sort of, for me, that was always the great weakness of Blood Bowl personally, that it was always a bit sort of overly predictable. And the closest it gets to that is the very unpredictable nature of activations and dice within it. It sort of
Mm.
it throws up the fact that the dice just go, what you thought was going to happen isn't going to happen. And I always
Yeah,
find that.
and that's where that thing about skill ceilings and judging luck and pushing your luck comes in very specifically in Blood Bowl. Like there's a lot of people who feel like they've got a high level command of that game because they accept those variables and then plan around them in very careful ways.
Hmm. But it always, to me, sort of, it always felt unsatisfying that it was, and I think it's like you say, Blood Bowl has a very sort of Marmite thing where you either find it unsatisfying that that's how the game swings, or you find it very enjoyable and exciting.
Hmm.
And to me, it's sort of more that it didn't feel like it represented the way that things swing for highly skilled sports people, but the way that things swing for me playing a board game when things swing like unpredictably. And I always wanted to be like, no, I wanted to feel like the way it is when a sports person turns out an incredible and unexpected piece of skill.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think like you can sort of summarize some of the thoughts here. I
Well,
think
I've got one other thing before you go into summarization wrap up mode.
okay.
So I think that there's something very, very interesting and exciting about the natural ability to reset game state multiple times inside a single game. That happens pretty much exclusively at the moment with sports games. Although I think it's intriguing that Malev has been exploring this with Great Helms, like resetting of like the scene within the game. So what I mean by this is like, when you score a touchdown in Blood Bowl or when you score a goal in Crud Bucket, you essentially return to your back lines and you kick off anew. And that's cool because it means you can have multiple iterations of the core game loop from setup to resolution of scoring. And you can do that a
Mm,
few different times, and maybe things have changed because, I've learned something about how you're playing, or, you've got one fewer team members because they've been kicked in the balls or whatever. But
mm,
I think that's really intriguing, the way that that happens. And I think that we don't allow ourselves to do that in combat miniature
mm,
games because it would feel kind of weird to just be like, all right, let's resurrect everybody, stop them back at the starting blocks, and off we go again. But like there's no reason not to do it in a more adventure game where it's expected that like maybe it's a co-op game and the heroes are supposed to survive and it's resetting with some new monsters or something. And we might see that as multiple games inside a campaign, but within a sports context, you're very clearly like, oh, we're just playing multiple plays across a single match. And then you can end up with a nice scoring system, which, maybe you can do things with that scoring system. And maybe, who's winning on the scoring allows you to change the way that things are set up. But it just creates a lot of gaminess, which, is no surprise because obviously what you're trying to replicate is a game, and then you turn it into a miniatures game and you get access to a bunch of gamey things that you can accept in new ways as part of the fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the sports games are based on things that are already game designed to be entertaining and
Yes.
interesting and exciting and have like understandable peaks and troughs of in a way that obviously war and combat absolutely aren't. Nobody designed combat in a way that will be
Right, but
cinematically
like,
exciting.
yeah, if you based a miniatures game off of, baseball, it's really well play tested at this point.
Yeah,
The pacing and
yeah,
the arcs are good.
absolutely. And so, yeah, leaning into the existing structures that have been built into various sports that have been developed over, hundreds of years in many cases to
Mm.
be entertaining and to keep things interesting. There's a reason that, like, when you kick the ball into the goal, you're not allowed to then just pile the goalkeeper as he picks it back out and kick it right back in again. just keep just the ball's right next to his goal at this point. This is
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Off,
You hold him. I'll keep
yeah,
throwing the ball over the line into his face.
absolutely. There's a reason somebody said, no, 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 no. Okay, when that happens, you all go back to the middle. And because it's a sport, everyone goes, sure, yeah, I'll go back to the middle, even though that's incredibly disadvantageous to me to do that, because we can actually play by arbitrary rules inserted in order to make things more interesting, exciting, in a way that, like you say, if a combat game would feel totally insane. The idea that you're fighting for your life and you go, oh, I got a bit too far ahead now. Let's go back to the middle so you get a fair chance of like pulling it back again.
Yeah, but at the same time, I guess like this makes me want to go, hang on a minute, but let's try that. Let's find reasons for it. Let's find, fantastical excuses for that. And then,
I mean, obviously, like sci-fi has easy things of being like, well, these guys are all holograms, and what we're doing is playing out combat scenarios in some sort of simulator.
mm,
So once you get to a certain number of kills, the hologram resets back at the start of the thing to see if you can like play the combat out, in a different way. And there's fantasy versions where you're all, in Valhalla and you're just fighting for the sheer joy of bloodlust, and you're all quite happy to get up, dust yourselves off because and then go back to the start of it. So it's entirely achievable, but it is sort of also,
it's just so much more natural in a sporting context.
yeah, we know that that's how sports work, so we don't have to create some sort of odd overarching meta explanation of it. And also I think it'd be interesting to do it with a combat game because of like the shape of the way that we expect a combat game to play out. It's
Yeah.
meant to be this attritional thing, and victory is meant to come when I wipe out the other force or kill the
Yeah,
dragon.
and if you zoomed out a little bit and you did like, a sort of rank and flank thing where like it matters who survives the first day, but in the second day everyone gets reinforcements, and then like the reinforcements are green but they're fresh, and the other guys are like they're a bit beaten but they like are in better positions. Like this, I can imagine that. It would need a little bit of a different zoom out, but
Yeah, so that's how to design a combat base. Oh no, no, sorry.
hang on a sec. Where were we? All right, we were talking about meta summarization. So
Yeah,
oh
part of the point of I think of a sports game is to look at the value of it designing a game that doesn't have sort of combat and certainly killing built into it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I,
Let's just not forget.
yes, and I think like looking at the way that sports that do have a level of violence do, like ice hockey famously has a high level of actual physical violence and people do get injured, and there are built-in rule responses to somebody acting with a specifically level of violence at various points, and you have like, you know, a built-in umpire sort of character within those games. I always thought it was interesting that Blood Bowl abstracted the ref a lot of the time, rather than having a ref with a line of sight just going, the ref is around and he might see you fouling. I think
Yeah, so there's that sci-fi skirmish game that we played, Code Aurora, which has these floating security bots within which you can't shoot people if you're in their bubble, which
yeah,
like we accepted because that's a cool game mechanic. It's a weird fantasy,
yeah.
but if they were a ref and we were in a sports situation, yeah, of course you can't do evil fouling when you're within 6 inches of the ref, but outside of that bubble.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I think, yeah, playing with all those things, like, you know, lowering the level of fatality, figuring out how a game is still interesting and still has an interesting flow and sort of climactic resolution without somebody getting their head stomped in. Really looking at how a ball can sort of exist within the game without having to be abstracted and have like, you know, a level of, it doesn't need to be perfect physics, but a level of sort of feeling like a ball, you know, recreating the skill ceiling that there is in sports, and leaning into the fact that you have arbitrary rules that force you to reset and act in a way that makes the game inherently more fun and interesting in a way that you can't lay those arbitrary rules generally into a combat game. I think are all the things to sort of to consider when designing a sports game, and are all things that certainly I sort of try to put into the sports game that I designed. I think you put a lot of them into the sports games that you've designed.
Yeah, I just think they offer so much interesting different flavor. Like it's such a refreshing kind of thing to design. Go make one,
Yeah,
gentle
absolutely.
listeners.
I really think there should be more of about the fact that I think that the ones I've listed are pretty much all of the ones I can think of, and Takakure is a pretty sort of deep cut, obscure one for a lot of people. I think it's a really, really cool game. Um, yeah, if
Also, play more Sabutio, people.
if
People sleep on that game.
if you've played and found, and there are definitely sports miniatures games that I haven't mentioned, we haven't mentioned in this video. If you've played another one that you'd like to recommend, please drop down to the comments section. I think it's a really cool genre of miniatures games. I'd like to hear about some other good, interesting ones. If you're designing one, also swing down to the comments section. Tell us about it. What real world sport or imaginary based sport is it based on? There's just quickly, there's one somebody was working on the Discord, which is like, apparently there's a quite obscure game which is about sort of flipping essentially a caber back and forth in the middle of a pitch, and if the caber like lands on the other person's side, you win. And he's decided to be that that's a switch for a death like grid on the thing, and so basically you've got two teams sort of trying to push this massive switch over into the other
Because
person.
if it falls and touches the ground, then bzzzt, they get
Get
fried.
electrocuted. So
Ah,
there
that's so Running Man. I love it.
there are some really sort of interesting obscure sports out there. Like the ball ones are kind of the obvious ones, but you know, I've not seen an Australian rules miniatures ball game. I haven't seen curling. I don't know of a hockey one. There's loads of options. If you're making one based on any of those sports or any more obscure sports, please tell us about it in the comments section. Hit the like and subscribes as you're on the way down there, and check out the link section where there is a link across to the Discord in which that game is being designed. I think there's a beta version of it and many others besides. People keep trying to do the mob football game, you know, where you get two villagers in to like just push a ball around. So there's been a few stabs at that in the Discord. There's also links across to our patrons where you can support the channel directly, and other places where you can buy the games that we have designed and support the channel indirectly.
Yeah, you can pick up a copy of Crud Bucket for a fiver on itch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's one of the links down there will get you across to Crud Bucket one way or another. But I think for now, from this episode, this Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.